Lonely widow. Bought 3 orphans with sacks on their heads. A twist unfolds in Wild West stories. They called Sarah Boone a mad widow when she paid silver for 3 orphans with sacks on their heads. But under her roof, through gunfire, blizzards, kidnappings, and whispered prayers, those boys would find more than survival. They would find home and a lantern burning against the dark. A widow rides into town with no reason to stop, until 3 children with burlap sacks on their heads change her fate forever. The wind came down off the high ridges smelling of old snow and pine sap, a thin, needling thing that got under a widow's skin the way memories do. Sarah Boone tugged the reins and meant to pass right through Red Creek. She didn't need salt, didn't need nails, didn't need a soul. The mare's hooves beat a steady clock across hardpan and cinders, and Sarah told herself she would not turn her head toward the square. But the wind shifted, and the wagon eased as if something unseen had taken the bit. She clicked her tongue, half cross at the animal, half at whatever nudge of Providence lived in a day like this. The church bell gave a tired single note. Somewhere a door banged, and then she saw the crowd. They were gathered like cattle around the hitching post, men in short suspenders, women with pinched faces, boys with dust on their boots, staring at 3 small figures, set out like broken tools. Burlap sacks hid their heads, ropes cinched at the neck, hands tied behind. A hand-painted sign leaned crooked on a crate, Orphans, $3 each. Sarah set the brake and stepped down. Her boots hit the dirt with that hard, dry sound a town learns to ignore. No one looked her way at first. Red Creek had long ago decided the Boone woman kept to herself and the world kept to her. She bought what she needed, nodded to the clerk, tipped her hat to the preacher, never sat for gossip, never stayed for hymn sings. Folks came to prefer her silence. It required nothing of them. She walked through the smell of coal smoke and horse, the murmur parting as she went. The auction man, red-faced, a scab under his jaw where a razor had missed, cleared his throat and tried a smile. "Ma'am," he said, "you here for one?" Sarah did not answer. "They ain't housebroke," he went on, voice too cheerful. "Don't cry none. Don't talk much neither. Seller says keep the sacks on. Orders is orders. Price is fair." The tallest of the 3 swayed on his feet, the sack tipping with him, thin knees knocking once. The smallest didn't move at all. Sarah could hear breathing under burlap. She could smell it too, sour and scared. "You understand what you're buying?" the man asked. "Could be trouble. Could be worse." Sarah set her hand inside her coat and brought out a leather purse that had grown soft with years of use. She opened it slow, counted silver into a palm that didn't shake. "All 3, she said. "What's that?" He blinked like sun had found him. "Pardon?" "Untie him." A hush came down quick, like someone laid a blanket over the whole square. The man's smile slid off his face. He looked to the crowd and back to the coins that flashed dull in her glove. Then he fished a knife from his pocket and sawed careful at the first rope. The sack fell. A boy's face came up pale as unbaked dough, eyes too old for the rest of him. His jaw set in a way that belonged on a man. He didn't flinch. The second sack dropped to show a narrow face with a yellowing bruise and a split lip, eyes moving fast without landing anywhere. The last sack came away, and there stood the littlest, cheeks wind-chapped, mouth a straight line, looking too hard at everything. "Names?" the auction man asked, maybe to fill the air. Sarah lifted her chin. "They'll tell him when they're ready." He tied his knife back in his pocket, clumsy now, as if his fingers had forgot their work. She stepped forward and touched each small shoulder with 2 fingers, light, steady. Then she turned and started for the wagon. The tall one moved first, like a soldier who'd just heard orders he'd been waiting on. He helped the bruised one down off the crate, then reached for the youngest. None of them spoke. None of them looked back. "Widow Boone," someone called, half laugh, half warning. "You gone plain crazy?" The word rolled around the square and died there. Sarah set her boot on the hub and climbed up without answering. The boys settled on the wagon bed, knees up, hands still in their own lap, like they didn't trust them to do better. She loosened the brake, clicked to the mare, and felt the wagon take their weight. She did not look at the preacher's shadow in the church doorway. She did not look at the deputy leaning on the jail stoop. She looked at the road cutting out of town, pale and certain as a promise. The wind changed again, carrying the cold bite of the creek and the faint sweetness of flour dust from the store. Sarah tucked the purse back under her coat and laid the reins across her thighs. Red Creek slid past, roofs and faces and talk falling away behind them. She hadn't meant to stop. She hadn't meant to need anyone again. But the wagon rolled toward the hills, and 3 small lives rode with her, and the day, thin and wintry as it was, felt a hair's breadth warmer. Under her broken roof, 3 shadows eat in silence, until the youngest whispers her name like he's known it all along. The wagon creaked slow up the ridge, iron rims biting into frozen dirt. By the time Sarah Boone turned into her own yard, dusk had colored the sky a faded brass. Her house waited where it always had, timbered walls leaning just enough to look tired, porch rail gray with weather. A barn slouched to one side, its roof patched with tin. Chickens scuttled under the steps at the sound of hooves. She pulled the mare to a stop. The boys didn't move. They sat stiff on the wagon bed, as if leaving town hadn't ended the reckoning. Sarah climbed down, boots crunching the thin ice at the trough. She looked back at them, 3 burlap sacks folded on the wagon like shed skins. "You're here now," she said, her voice even. "Best climb down." The tallest swung off first. Eli, she would later learn. His shoulders were narrow, but set firm. He turned, gave a hand to the boy with the bruise, Jesse. The younger hesitated, then let himself be steadied. The little one slid down last, boots too loose, cap askew. He looked at Sarah a long time before dropping his eyes. Caleb. Inside, the air held a faint trace of wood smoke and lye soap. The stove still carried warmth from that morning's fire. Sarah set her bonnet on the peg and stirred coals with the poker until sparks glowed. She hung a kettle, filled it from the bucket by the door. The boys stood just inside the threshold, unsure, their breath fogged in the chill. "Sit," she pointed to the table. They obeyed, silent, hands folded tight. She measured cornmeal into a pan, added water, salt, set it on the stove. Batter hissed, the smell of scorched grain filling the room. Sarah felt their eyes on her, but did not meet them. She had lived too many years with silence to fear it now. When the cakes browned, she slid them onto plates, set them down with mugs of water. The boys ate like wolves, fast, guarded, no sound but scrape of fork and swallow of dry throats. Sarah ate slower, watching the shadows stretch across the floorboards. Eli kept his chin high, jaw clenched, as if daring someone to strike. Jesse huddled small, his left hand twitching near the bruise on his cheek. Caleb chewed soft, eyes darting between his brothers and Sarah. She recognized hunger, not only in their bellies, but in their faces, the look of young creatures taught not to expect. When the plates were empty, she cleared them without a word. The boys sat still, as if waiting for the next order. Sarah opened the chest near the hearth, drew out 3 wool blankets, worn but clean. She spread them by the fire. "You'll sleep here tonight. There's room. Tomorrow, we'll see." Eli's mouth twitched, almost a question, but he swallowed it. Jesse lay down without removing his boots. Caleb pulled the blanket up to his chin, eyes wide open to the flames. Sarah doused the lantern, climbed the narrow stairs to her room. The boards groaned under her weight, the house settling into the cold night. She lay awake, listening to the stove tick, to the boys shifting below. Sometime near midnight, a sound broke the hush. A child's voice, small and certain, carried up through the floorboards. Sarah Boone. Not a question, not fear, just the name. Her breath caught sharp. She had not spoken it all evening. No one had, yet the boy had said it as if he had always known. She rose, crossed to the window. Outside, the hills lay under a pale wash of starlight, the creek glimmering faint down in the hollow. The wind moved gentle through the pines. Sarah pressed her palm to the cold glass and stood there a long while, the whisper still in her ears, the ache of long loneliness shifting into something she could not yet name. Nightmares tear through the cabin, Eli screaming, Jesse hiding, Caleb trembling, and Sarah swears no one will drag them away again. The first scream didn't sound like a boy. It ripped from the floorboards before dawn, a raw tear that made Sarah Boone sit bolt upright, heart banging like a screen door. She was down the stairs without her shawl, bare feet finding knots in the wood, the way a hand finds prayer beads. Eli thrashed by the hearth, blanket snarled round his legs, eyes shut, breath sawing, hands clawing at air that wasn't there. Jesse stood in the corner by the bucket, small as a fence post shadow, and would not move. Caleb tucked his face under his arm. "Eli," Sarah said, low and even. She knelt and caught his shoulders the way you take hold of a skittish horse, firm, not mean. "It's not real, son. You're home." He jerked like a fish on a line. Don't let him." The words broke. "No one's pulling you anywhere," she said. "Not from this house." His eyes snapped open. For a breath, he looked through her. Then he found the room. Sweat cut pale tracks in the soot on his face. Shame rose after fear. He shoved his hands under his arms to stop the shaking. "Sorry," he rasped. "Don't be," Sarah said, and felt how much the words weighed. She banked the stove, set the kettle, kept to the good work a woman can do when a night goes sideways. When water shivered, she pinched tea into mugs, added a whisper of honey. "Sit." Eli sat. So did Caleb, eyes red and round. Jesse hovered at the edge of lamplight, not trusting his feet. "Tea slows the bad kind of remembering," she told them. "Makes it walk instead of run." They drank. The room settled. Outside, dawn paled the windows. When the boys dozed again, Sarah scrubbed the iron pan, real quiet. Each small circle a kind of thinking. She had known loneliness. She had not known this fear, that the dark could reach into a room and lay hands on someone you meant to protect. By noon, gossip blew in. 2 women down valley pulled up at the fence and talked loud enough to carry. Had she gone foolish, taking in trouble like that? At the pump, old Tom Kinney tipped his hat and told her 3 ways a thing like this ends: court, jail, or graves. Sarah nodded like he'd offered weather. Near supper, Reverend Cole came. Tall, spare, coat cuffs shiny from years of pews. He removed his hat at the door and warmed his palms over the stove, as if invited, though he had not. His eyes were kind, which didn't make questions easier. "I hear the Boone place has 3 new souls," he said. "The Boone place has a roof, a stove, and work to spare," Sarah answered. He tried a smile, thin as winter sun. "Some in town say those boys been passed around more times than a library book. They wonder if you can hold 'em." Sarah cut cornbread while he spoke. Steam rose like a blessing. "Folks wonder plenty," she said. "They could save time and wonder about their own kitchens." He cleared his throat. "Forgive the asking, but the county may come. Papers, questions? You know how it is." "I do," Sarah said. "I also know how it was when nobody came." Eli hovered close, pretending to whittle a stick that didn't need it. Jesse kept to the corner with his bruise like a faded stamp. Caleb drew circles on the table with a wet fingertip, as if writing something only he could read. "They've been hurt, Mrs. Boone," the Reverend said softly. "Hurt boys can hurt back." "Then they'll learn another way here," Sarah said. "Or I will." He set his hat back on, respectful. "Do you think you can keep them?" Sarah looked at the shapes of her evening, one hard with pride, one quiet as silt, one light as a willow switch. Her answer rose from a place in her chest that had been empty a long time. "As long as I've got breath," she said. "They stay." The words landed and held. The Reverend studied her face a heartbeat longer and let out a breath he hadn't meant to keep. "Then I'll pray that breath runs long," he said, tipping his hat. Sarah watched him go, the cold walking up from the creek. Behind her, Eli had stopped whittling nothing. Jesse had moved an inch from the wall. Caleb leaned against her hip, the way little ones do when a thing is decided. She let him and did not move him away. Night came soft. The kettle rattled once and went quiet. Out past the yard, a coyote trotted the fence line, skinny and sure. Sarah slid the pins into the window sashes and set an extra blanket by the hearth. The house felt no bigger, but it felt less empty. A stranger rides in with forged papers and a black horse, claiming the boys as property, but Sarah's shotgun says otherwise. The week passed gray and brittle. Snow threatened on the ridges, though the valley floor still held to mud. Sarah Boone worked her hands raw splitting kindling, patching the henhouse with boards cut too short, cooking beans and cornmeal until she could almost forget the town stairs. Almost. The boys carried their own silence like extra weight. Eli chopped wood wrong on purpose, daring her to scold him. Jesse slipped off to the barn for hours, returning with dust on his face and no explanation. Caleb followed Sarah everywhere, his small boots dragging a beat behind hers. It was near sundown when the knock came. Not a neighbor's knock. Too hard, too certain. Sarah set down her mending and opened the door onto the lean silhouette of a man astride a black horse. He swung down slow, dust rising from the trail behind him. "Evening, ma'am," he said. His hat brim shadowed sharp cheekbones, mustache curled neat as a drawing. He held a folded packet in one gloved hand. "Name's Silas Crowley. Got business." Sarah did not invite him in. "What sort?" "The lawful sort." He lifted the packet, seal of the county pressed red on its flap. "Papers say these boys are in my care. Signed by Judge Hammond, 2 counties over." Eli stepped into the doorway, jaw tight. Jesse hovered behind, half hidden. Caleb's small hand found Sarah's skirt. "You've come far," Sarah said. "Not far enough, it seems." Crowley smiled without warmth. 3 children don't fetch themselves. You've got what's mine. They're not yours. They're property until made otherwise. Law says so. His voice slid oily, practiced. "I paid good money. Miners out Nevada way need strong arms. Boys earn their keep or die trying. Better than starving in ditches, wouldn't you say?" Sarah let the silence breathe sharp between them. Then she laid her palm against the doorframe where the old shotgun leaned. She did not raise it, not yet, but her fingers curled near the trigger guard. "You ride back the way you came," she said. Crowley's smile twitched. "You think steel scares me, widow?" "No," she said evenly. "But I think it'll stop you all the same." The yard went still. A crow barked once from the cottonwood, the only witness. Crowley's horse stamped, blowing steam. He tucked the packet back into his coat. "I'll be returnin'," he said. "Paper's stronger than stubborn, stronger than widows, too." "You try it," Sarah said, "and see." For the first time his eyes shifted, as if measuring the steadiness in her face. Then he tipped his hat mock slow, mounted, and turned the black horse down slope. Dust followed him like a curse. Eli shut the door hard. Jesse muttered something low, bitter, and kicked at the floor. Caleb pressed his cheek into Sarah's skirt. She rested a hand on his hair, the way you steady yourself on a rail when the ground pitches. The light bled from the windows. Sarah pulled the latch, checked the shotgun once more, and felt the house draw tight around them like a chest full of held breath. Crowley would come again. Of that she was certain. A goat found with its neck snapped proves Crowley isn't gone. His message is clear. Fear lives closer than wolves. Winter settled into the valley with a slow ache. Frost glazed the fence rails each morning, and the pump handle stung any hand too bare. Sarah Boone kept the fire going from dawn to long past dark, the rhythm of survival pounding like a drumbeat. 3 boys gave her reason to keep the kettle warm and the chores steady, though none of it came easy. Eli took to the axe with a stubborn streak. He swung hard, wrong most of the time, scattering chips instead of splitting clean. Sarah stood behind him one cold morning, correcting his grip. "Not like you're trying to kill the wood," she said. "Let the blade do the work." He scowled, jaw set, but tried again. The log cracked neat. For just a heartbeat, pride flickered across his face before he masked it with indifference. Jesse chose the garden, though the ground was near frozen. He crouched quiet, loosening the earth around the last of the onions, small fingers gentle as a preacher's touch on scripture. He lifted each bulb as though it might break, brushed soil from roots with care. Sarah watched from the porch, arms folded, struck by how tenderness could survive in a boy already carrying bruises. Caleb stayed closest of all. His boots thumped soft behind her every step, apron string in his little fist more than once. In the kitchen, he hummed broken bits of hymns while Sarah mixed flour. "Swing low," he whispered, voice drifting in and out like smoke. She didn't join him, not yet, but the tune hung in the rafters long after he stopped. The days turned work into ritual. Water drawn, wood stacked, bread baked. For a while, Sarah allowed herself to believe Crowley's shadow had ridden past for good. Then came the sign. It was Jesse who found it. He ran breathless from the barn, eyes wide, pointing toward the pen. The chickens were scattered, feathers blown like snow across the yard. One goat lay still near the fence, neck bent wrong, no sign of teeth or struggle. Just broken, deliberate. Eli stood over the carcass, fists clenched. "He's playing with us," he said, voice thick. Sarah knelt, fingers on the animal's still warm hide. She knew Eli was right. Wolves took meat. Men left warnings. That night, she lit an extra lantern and set it in the window. She pulled the boys close to the hearth, served beans and cornbread with a steadiness she didn't feel. The wind scratched at the shutters, rattling them like knuckles on a coffin. When the boys had settled into blankets, Sarah sat at the table alone. Her hand found the small wooden cross she kept in her apron pocket, edges worn smooth by years of clutching. She held it tight, eyes on the dark beyond the glass. "They want to scare us," she whispered, low enough the boys could not hear. "But I'm still here." Her words sank into the silence, as much promise as prayer. In the roar of a blizzard, Eli's bloody dream collides with a midnight knock, news that Crowley's coin is buying the law itself. The storm came down off the mountains like judgment. One day the air was sharp but clear. The next, snow whirled across the valley in sheets so thick the barn vanished behind a white curtain. Sarah Boone had lived through Wyoming winters before, but never with 3 boys under her roof. Every creak of timber, every gust that rattled the shutters, reminded her the world could bury them without a second thought. Inside, the fire roared, eating through logs as fast as Eli could haul them in. He stomped his boots, red-faced, shoulders dusted white, but his eyes burned with a kind of pride. Jesse stacked kindling neat as coins, silent but steady. Caleb curled near the stove with a shawl drawn to his chin, humming a broken lullaby. Sarah moved between them, keeping pots filled and hands busy, telling herself that work was the best prayer she knew. Night fell early. The storm beat harder, slamming the roof with fists of snow. Sarah had just banked the fire when the scream tore through the room. It was Eli, twisting in his blanket, eyes shut, body jerking like a hooked trout. His voice cracked against the rafters. Don't let him, please." Sarah was on her knees beside him, gripping his shoulders firm. "Eli, it's not real. You're home. You're safe," he thrashed, breath ragged. Jesse froze at the far wall, hands clenched, too scared to move. Caleb pressed both palms to his ears and whimpered. "Wake up, son," Sarah said, her voice low, commanding as a church bell. "The dream's got no hold here." Eli's eyes flew open at last. He sucked in air, wild, then shoved her away as if afraid she'd strike. His chest heaved. Sweat rolled down his temples. "He was here," he rasped. "The rope man. I smelled it." Sarah kept her hands where he could see them. "Not here, not in this house, not ever again." The storm battered the windows as if to argue. Eli looked at the floor, ashamed of the tremor still in his hands. Sarah rose slow, set the kettle on, poured water into mugs. She dropped in leaves, honey, pushed one toward him. "Drink. Tea makes the bad kind of remembering walk instead of run." They drank in silence, the blizzard's howl filling every empty space. The boys dozed uneasy afterward, blankets pulled high. Sarah stayed awake in the rocker, watching shadows crawl the walls. Near midnight, another knock came, sharp, deliberate, carried clear through the storm. Sarah rose, shotgun in hand, and eased the door open a crack. Reverend Cole stood there, coat caked white, hat in his fist. "Evening, Mrs. Boone," he said, voice nearly lost to the wind. "Had to ride out. Word is Silas Crowley's spread coin in the county. Some say the judge will be bought, if he ain't already." Snow swirled in around him. Sarah gripped the doorframe hard enough, her knuckles ached. "He's coming," the Reverend said. "Money travels faster than horses." Sarah let him in, shut the storm behind. Eli stirred in his blanket. Jesse blinked up, wary. Caleb clutched the hem of her skirt. Sarah looked from their faces to the Reverend's. Her jaw set hard. "He can come," she said. "We'll be here." The fire cracked loud then, sparks leaping, as if the stove itself believed her. Snow in the hollow explodes with gunfire as Sarah faces Crowley's hired guns, until an old blacksmith becomes her unlikely ally. When the storm broke, the valley lay hushed beneath a white shroud. Pines bowed low, fences leaned with the weight of snow, and the creek moved under ice like a beast chained but restless. Sarah Boone knew quiet never lasted. Trouble rode faster once the road was clear. By the third day, word came from a peddler passing the fence line. Judge Merrick was holding court in Cottonwood, the next town east. Sarah made her choice that evening. She saddled the mare, packed bread, jerky, and a flask of water. "I'll bring this matter to a real bench," she told Eli, Jesse, and Caleb. "Crowley won't buy every man in the territory." Eli's jaw worked. "You shouldn't ride alone." "I've been alone longer than you've been alive," Sarah answered. "Keep the fire lit. Don't open the door for no one." The road wound narrow through the hollow. Drifts crusted hard, branches heavy with ice. Sarah kept her eyes sharp, one hand near the rifle tucked under the seat. She felt the quiet wrong before she heard it, the kind that sucks sound away. Then came the shout. 3 riders burst from the tree line, scarves over their faces, pistols in hand. The mare screamed and reared, nearly tipping the wagon. Sarah hauled hard on the reins, heart hammering. "Easy, widow," one called, circling. "Crowley sends his regards." The first shot cracked, splintering the wagon rail. Sarah ducked, drew the rifle smooth, and fired back. One man pitched sideways into the snow, his horse bolting riderless into the brush. The others wheeled wide, firing wild. Powder smoke drifted on the cold air, acrid, biting. Sarah slid from the wagon, boots crunching, eyes steady. Another shot grazed the wheel, showering her with wood chips. She sighted, breathed once, and squeezed. The second rider jerked, saddle leather creaking, then turned tail, spurring hard. The third lingered, pistol raised. But when Sarah leveled the rifle again, he thought better and galloped off, snow flying from his hooves. Her mare trembled, steam rolling from flared nostrils. Sarah steadied the animal with a hand to its neck, her pulse still thundering. Her arm stung where a bullet had kissed through her sleeve, warm blood seeping slow. She gritted against it, reloaded, and scanned the trees. Nothing but wind and crows. The body lay twisted near a drift. Sarah approached, rifle ready. The man was young, too young for murder in his eyes, but Crowley's coin had brought him here. She left him where he lay. The land would take him quick in that cold. The wound in her arm burned worse with every mile. By the time she crested the last hill before home, the world blurred at the edges. She nearly pitched from the wagon when a shout stopped her. "Who there?" A broad figure waved from the smithy porch. A man gray at the temples, arms black with soot even in winter. Hank Grady, the blacksmith who'd mended half the town's wagons. He strode into the snow, caught the reins, and steadied her down from the seat. "You're bled near through," he muttered, hauling her inside. The forge still glowed banked in the corner, heat rolling. He cleaned the cut with whiskey, stitched it clumsy but strong, his big hands gentle as he could manage. Sarah bore it without a sound. When he tied the bandage off, he looked at her a long moment. "Crowley's men?" he asked. She nodded once. Hank set his jaw. "Steel remembers, Widow Boone. I'll forge locks for your doors, bars for your windows. Maybe something sharper, if it comes to it." Sarah met his eyes. For the first time in years, she let someone else's promise rest beside her own. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the howl of wolves from the ridge. Inside, firelight licked across iron, and Sarah knew the fight was far from finished. Crowley kidnaps Caleb into the dark of an abandoned mine, where firelight, bullets, and a mother's resolve ignite a reckoning. The night Caleb disappeared, the air itself felt wrong. The lantern by the porch guttered, though there was no wind. The yard stood too still, as if even the pines held their breath. Sarah Boone had only stepped into the barn to check the feed. Yet when she turned back, the smallest blanket lay empty by the hearth, and the door swung open wide. Eli and Jesse came running from the loft, faces drained white. "He was here." "Then he wasn't," Jesse stammered, pointing at the dark. Eli had already grabbed the rifle, fury crackling off him like sparks. A scrap of burlap, snagged on the fence rail, told the rest. Crowley had come like a thief, fast and silent, snatching what mattered most. Sarah's blood went cold, but her voice held steady. "He's not gone. We'll bring him back." They saddled in minutes, riding by lantern light into the timber. The snow swallowed sound, hooves muffled as if the earth conspired against them. Eli found the trail first, boot prints heavy, dragging, a smaller set stumbling between. "Mine road," he muttered. "Only place it leads." The abandoned shaft gaped black against the hillside, timber braces leaning like broken teeth. Smoke leaked faint from within. Sarah dismounted, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. "Stay behind me." Inside, the air stank of coal dust and damp rot. Shadows leapt wild against the walls. Caleb's muffled cry carried down the tunnel, thin but real. Sarah's heart seized, then hardened. Crowley's voice followed, smooth as ever. "Boys ain't yours, widow, never were, but I'll trade. Give me the other two. You can have the pup back." Eli growled low, "Over my dead body." Sarah motioned him quiet. She stepped forward, lantern high. Crowley crouched by the fire pit, pistol loose in his hand. Caleb sat bound to a post, cheeks wet, eyes wide but defiant. "Walk away, Crowley," Sarah said. "There's still a choice." He laughed, harsh against the stone. "Choice? Out here, law's whoever's got the gun." The shot cracked before he finished. Splinters of timber sprayed where Eli fired from the shadows. Crowley cursed, ducked, returned fire. The tunnel rang with thunder. Jesse darted low, blade flashing, slicing Caleb's ropes. The boy bolted straight into Sarah's arms. "Run!" she barked. Chaos swallowed the shaft. Eli grappled one of Crowley's hired hands, steel against fist, the lantern swinging wild. Sarah shouldered the rifle, sighted, and fired. Crowley stumbled, his pistol clattering to stone, arm bleeding. He snarled, eyes full of hate but touched with fear. "Finish it," he hissed. Sarah stepped closer, barrel leveled. "Children ain't cattle. You remember that." Her voice carried like scripture in the dark. Then she lowered the gun, just enough to let him live with shame. "Crawl back to whatever hole spawned you." Crowley spat blood, clutching his wound, and slunk deeper into the dark. His men scattered after him, boots hammering the stone until silence swallowed them whole. Sarah gathered Caleb close, steadying Eli's bleeding arm with her free hand. Jesse stood pale, knife still dripping. The fire pit hissed low, smoke curling like ghosts toward the rafters. They stumbled out together, into air sharp with pine and stars. Snowflakes drifted, cold and clean, against their hot faces. Behind them, the mine glowed faint, a wound in the mountain, smoke bleeding into night. At the ridge, Sarah stopped, breathing hard, her hand heavy on each boy's shoulder. "No more running," she said. "Not from him, not from anyone." And the three nodded, the weight of her words anchoring them deeper than the storm ever could. A fragile sapling blooms white against the hard ground, and one word etched in wood, home, rewrites what family means. Spring crept into the valley like a shy guest, hesitant at first, then certain. Snow pulled back from the ridges, the creek swelled with melt, and the earth softened under boot and hoof. Sarah Boone rose one dawn to find the frost gone from the windows and the smell of damp soil pushing in through the cracks. For the first time in months, she set aside her heavy coat. The boys worked beside her that morning, each in his own way. Eli swung the axe with cleaner strokes now, his arm healed but bearing a scar that shone like a badge. Jesse bent low in the garden, planting beans with fingers that treated seeds like fragile eggs. Caleb carried water in a tin pail almost too big for him, spilling half with every step, but smiling anyway. When the chores were done, Sarah gathered them by the fence. She held a sapling in her hands, roots wrapped in burlap, no taller than Caleb's chest. "This one goes here," she said, pointing to a patch of earth by the porch. "We'll call it the Tree of Hope." Together they dug. The soil smelled rich and raw. Eli shoveled, Jesse pressed dirt back, Caleb patted it with both palms as if sealing a promise. Sarah stood back and felt something stir in her chest. An ache that wasn't sorrow this time, but something lighter. Days passed. The sapling took root. And one cool morning, Caleb came rushing from the yard, cheeks pink, voice high with wonder. "It's got flowers," he cried. White blossoms speckled the branches, fragile and bright against the rough land. Sarah came to look, wiping flour from her hands. The sight stole her breath. Against hard ground and hard lives, here bloomed a stubborn kind of beauty. Eli touched one bloom with rough fingers, almost reverent. Jesse stood close, silent but smiling, eyes softer than Sarah had ever seen. Caleb danced circles around the tree, laughter sharp and free. That night, Sarah sat them by the hearth, bread warm on the table. Caleb, after scrawling shapes in the ash with a stick, brought her a plank of wood. Across it, in uneven letters, he had written one word: home. Her throat tightened. She traced the letters with her fingertip, each one crooked, each one true. Later, Reverend Cole arrived on horseback, dust rising behind him. He stood at the edge of the porch, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the sapling. "There's no family that starts perfect," he said softly. "Folks build one out of what's given. That's the Lord's work too." Sarah looked at the blossoms swaying in the breeze, then at the three faces turned toward her in firelight. For the first time in years, she felt the silence of her house, not as emptiness, but as peace. The moonlight lantern burns through the dark, drawing lost children home, proof that even the wildest West can be healed. Summer settled over Red Creek with the smell of cut hay and hot dust. The valley grass turned gold, the creek slowed to a trickle, and evenings stretched long and honey-colored. Sarah Boone sat on her porch one such night, lantern lit against the dark, the flame steady in its glass. The boys sprawled across the steps, Eli with his arms crossed, Jesse whittling a crooked stick, Caleb humming some tune too old for his little voice. Word had traveled by then. Folks knew Silas Crowley hadn't disappeared for good, and whispers carried of other men just like him, trading children, passing them like coin. The thought alone soured Sarah's stomach, but instead of fear, she felt the kind of steel a forge leaves in iron, tempered, unbending. Hank Grady came by often now, always with something in hand. Iron bolts, new hinges, once even a small cast-iron skillet for Caleb's favorite flapjacks. Reverend Cole brought books and news, the kind that mattered. Together, the three spoke plain. Red Creek needed a place for the unwanted, the cast aside, not a jail, not a poorhouse, something different, a home. They chose a name one evening while the boys listened close, the Boone Light Home. Sarah resisted at first, but the Reverend smiled. "Light draws the lost," he said, and Boone is the one who struck the match. Word spread quick. At first, only the curious came, townsfolk who once called her foolish, now carrying flour, spare quilts, old tools. Later came the children, a pair of brothers left behind by a drifting peddler, a girl whose folks vanished in the mining camps. Each brought a story, written in bruises or silence. Each found blankets by the hearth and chores that made their hands useful. On the night that marked a year since the sapling took root, Sarah sat again on the porch. The tree had grown tall enough to cast a small shadow, its leaves stirring in the warm breeze. Under its branches, Caleb and Jesse played at cards, arguing soft. Eli leaned against the porch rail, taller now, steady-eyed, watching the road as though daring it to bring trouble again. Sarah opened the worn Bible on her lap, reading by lantern glow. Her voice rose low and sure, words older than the land itself. The children listened, not always to the verses, but to the cadence, the proof that someone meant to stay. A gust swept through, making the lantern flame dance. Eli looked over. "Why you always keep that light burning, even when we're all in?" Sarah set her hand on the lantern's handle. "Because somewhere out there, another soul is walking the dark. They'll see this flame. They'll know they ain't alone." Silence fell sweet after that, broken only by crickets and the murmur of the creek. The boys leaned closer, blankets wrapped, eyes heavy. When Sarah lifted her gaze, she saw the valley stretching wide under the stars. Hard land, lonely land. Yet from her porch, with the lantern's glow spilling into the night, it felt less cruel. In the Wild West, storms would come again. Trouble would ride down trails with guns and papers. But here, on this patch of earth, a widow and her children, blood or not, had lit something that no bullet or winter wind could snuff. The Boone light burned steady, and in that light, for the first time since burying her husband, Sarah Boone felt the truth settle deep. She was no longer alone. Out here on the frontier, life was never easy. The land took as much as it gave, and folks learned to carry scars right alongside hope. Yet sometimes, in a crooked little house with a lantern burning on the porch, you'd find proof that even the loneliest places could grow roots of family and light. Maybe that's the lesson Sarah Boone left behind, that home isn't built of timber and stone, but of the hands willing to hold on when the world says, let go. If this story stirred something in you, I'd be glad to hear it. Maybe you've known a place or a person that felt like a lantern against your own dark night. Share it if you wish, the kind of words that keep the fire warm long after the telling's done.